Ours outside the viewport looked peaceful, but Captain Daniel knew that peace was about to shatter. He stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the massive space station called Concordia Prime rode slowly in the distance. The station was home to the Galactic Assembly, where 200 alien species made decisions that affected trillions of lives. Today, those decisions would change everything for humanity. And Maya Santos sat at her communication console, her fingers moving across the controls as she monitored dozens of channels. She was young but brilliant, and trusted her instincts more than any piece of technology on his ship. When she looked up at him with worry in her eyes, he felt his stomach tighten. Hatter had been aboard the station for 6 hours now. The meeting was supposed to be routine, a simple discussion about trade agreements and border patrols, but Maya had been picking up strange signals all morning, encrypted messages flying between alien delegations. Something was wrong. Her lock hissed open, and Ambassador walked onto the bridge. She was 50 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of political battles. Had never seen her look defeated before, but today her face was pale, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a data tablet. Did not speak at first. She simply handed the tablet to and let him read the words that would change human history. The message was official, stamped with the seal of the Galactic Assembly. It declared that humanity must surrender all colonized worlds beyond the Sol system within 9 days. Every colony, every outpost, every station that humans had built over 2 centuries of expansion would become property of the Assembly. The message 3 times before he could speak. His voice came out rough and angry. He asked what this meant, why the Assembly would demand such a thing. Plain that it was about 6 months ago, human miners on that colony world had discovered the largest deposit of crystals ever found in the galaxy. It was the rarest and most valuable substance known to exist. It could power ships faster than anything else, heal wounds that no medicine could touch, and generate energy that seemed almost limitless. Whoever controlled the future. Some claimed that humanity was too young and too dangerous to possess power. They said humans had only been in space for 300 years, barely children compared to species that had traveled the stars for millions of years. They argued that giving humans control would upset the balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for ages. Spoke up from her console. She said she had intercepted communications that told a different story. The mandate had not come from the full assembly. It had been pushed through by the Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the galaxy. They had bribed small species, threatened others, and manipulated the vote while most delegates did not even understand what they were proving. His anger grew hotter. They had always looked down on humans, calling them primitive and unworthy of respect. They had blocked human membership in the assembly for decades, forcing humanity to exist as observers rather than full members. Now they were trying to steal everything humans had built. Slowly, she said she had suspected involvement from the moment the mandate was announced. The counselor, an ancient creature named Death, had smiled at her across the chamber as the vote was recorded. It was the smile of someone who believed they had already won. Asked what options they had. Could they appeal the decision? Could they negotiate? Her head, the mandate was final. There was no appeal process, no negotiation allowed. The assembly had spoken, and species that assembly mandates faced consequences that ranged from economic isolation to military action. Humanity could comply and lose everything they had worked for, or they could refuse and face the combined might of the galaxy. Bridge was silent as everyone absorbed the reality. Humanity had 400 warships spread across their territory. The assembly could call upon 50,000 vessels from dozens of species. If it came to war, the numbers were hopeless. Broke the silence. She said there was something else in the intercepted messages. Several small species had voted against the mandate, arguing that it was unjust and set a danger present. If the assembly could strip one species of their territory today, they could do it to anyone tomorrow. These voices had been drowned out by the and their allies, but they existed. Considered this information carefully. She said they gave them something to work with, though not much. If they could prove the mandate was illegally manipulated, they might be able to challenge it. But that would take time, and they only had 9 days. Decision. He ordered Maya to compile every piece of evidence she had gathered about manipulation. He told his navigation officer to set course for Earth at maximum speed. The leaders of humanity needed to know what was happening, and they needed to decide how to respond. The ship prepared to jump into fast and light travel, stood beside at the viewport. She looked old and tired, but there was steel in her voice when she spoke. She said she would not recommend compliance. She had spent her entire career trying to earn humanity a place among the stars, trying to prove that humans deserved respect. Surrendering now would prove the right. It would tell the galaxy that humans were weak, that they could be pushed around, that they would bow down when threatened. Agreed with her completely. He said humans had never backed down from a challenge, not when they faced ice ages on Earth, not when they first reached for the moon, not when they built their first colonies on hostile worlds. They would not start backing down now. Stars stretched in lines as the ship jumped to faster than light speed, carrying its crew toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Concordia Prime grew smaller until it disappeared into the darkness. Somewhere on that station, Count Lorev was probably celebrating his victory. Did not know that his victory was far from complete. He did not understand that humans were different from the species he had bullied and manipulated before. When pushed into a corner, humans did not surrender. They fought back with everything they had, and sometimes that was enough to change the course of history. Journey to Earth would take 3 days. 3 days to prepare arguments, gather evidence, and plan for a future that suddenly looked very dark. But as he watched the stars fly past his ship, he felt something that surprised him. He felt hope. Humanity had faced impossible odds before and survived. They would find a way to survive this too. Star retired to her quarters to draft a report. Maya continued monitoring communications, searching for any advantage they could use. And Cap stood on his bridge, thinking about the 90 days ahead and wondering how humanity would answer the greatest challenge it had ever faced. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. They would not go quietly into the night. The city of Geneva had seen many historic moments over the centuries, but none quite like this. The United Nations Space Command headquarters filled with leaders from every nation on Earth, their faces grim as they gathered in the Great Hall. Holographic displays showed maps of human territory, the colonies that millions of people called home, the worlds they were being told to abandon. The general stood at the center of the chamber, calm presence in a room full of fear and anger. He was 54 years old, a former diplomat who had spent his life finding peaceful solutions to impossible problems. But as he read the assembly mandate for the 20th time, he wondered if peace was even possible anymore. Relaine stood beside him, her military uniform crisp and her expression hard. She was 61, the highest ranking officer in Earth's defense forces, and she had spent her entire career preparing for threats that she hoped would never come. Now the threat was here, bigger than anything she had imagined. Activated a holographic display that showed the scale of what they faced. 400 human warships were scattered across their territory, most of them small patrol vessels designed for peacekeeping rather than combat. The Assembly could mobilize 50,000 ships from species loyal to the Dominion alone. Even if every human ship fought perfectly, the numbers were overwhelming. Room fell silent as leaders absorbed the reality. Some faces showed despair, others showed defiance. A few showed nothing at all, their owners too shocked to react. A new hologram flickered to life, showing the face of Dr. Price. He was calling from 7, the colony world at the center of the crisis. Behind him, massive mining operation continued as workers extracted crystals from deep underground. Price explained what they stood to lose. The deposits on 7 were larger than anyone had first estimated. His team had barely scratched the surface, but already they had enough crystal to revolutionize human technology. Within 5 years, they could build ships faster than anything in the galaxy. Within 10 years, they could develop metal technology that would extend human by centuries. 20 years, they could generate enough clean energy to solve every resource problem humanity had ever faced. All of that required keeping the colony. If they surrendered 7, they would claim them for themselves. Humanity would remain a minor species, dependent on others for scraps of technology and respect. Everything they had worked for would mean nothing. Secretary General thanked Dr. Price and closed the connection. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of leaders from every continent. He asked for their thoughts, their suggestions, their fears. The debate that followed was fierce and painful. Some argued for compliance. They said humanity could not win a war against the entire galaxy, that survival mattered more than pride, that they could rebuild over time. Others rejected compliance completely. They said surrendering would only invite more demands, that they would never stop taking until humanity had nothing left, that some things were worth fighting for even if victory was impossible. The argument went back and forth for hours. Voices grew loud and tempers flared. Old rivalries between nations resurfaced as people blamed each other for the situation. It seemed like no decision would ever be reached. The doors opened and an ambassador entered the room, followed by Lieutenant Maya Santos. They had arrived from Concordia Prime just hours ago, and they carried information that changed everything. Activated her datapad and displayed the evidence she had gathered. Intercepted communications showed official bragging delegates from small species. Recorded conversations revealed threats made against anyone who opposed the mandate. Financial records traced payments from accounts to assembly members who voted in favor of stripping human territory. And it was not legitimate. It was a crime orchestrated by the to steal human resources and prevent humanity from becoming a rival power. The assembly had been manipulated, and most delegates did not even know it. This revelation shifted the mood in the room. Anger replaced despair as leaders realized they had been victims of a scheme rather than a fair judgment. But it also raised questions. Even if the mandate was corrupt, how could they prove it? Who would listen? Senator spoke for the first time. She said they had one advantage they had not expected. Several species had voted against the mandate suspicious of intention. These species were small and weak, unable to challenge them directly, but they represented potential allies. If humanity could show them proof of crimes, they might find support in unexpected places. Relaine added a military perspective. She said their best strategy was defense rather than offense. Human ships could not defeat the assembly fleet in open battle, but they could make any attack extremely costly. If they positioned their forces carefully, they could buy time while diplomacy worked to expose the truth. The general listened to all arguments and then made his decision. He announced that humanity would not comply with the mandate. They would not fire the first shot, but they would not surrender their homes here. Instead, they would send a formal request for arbitration to the assembly, demanding an investigation into how the mandate was passed. This would buy them time and put pressure on them to defend their action. This path was dangerous. They might ignore diplomacy and attack anyway, but believed that showing strength and demanding justice was better than accepting an illegal order. If humanity was going to fall, they would fall standing up rather than kneeling down. The room voted on his proposal. The result was not unanimous, but it was clear. Humanity would resist. Relaine immediately began issuing orders to her commanders across human space. Ships would move to defensive positions around key colonies. 7 would receive the strongest protection they could provide. Every crew would prepare for combat while hopping it would never come. Ambassador prepared a new message for the assembly, formally challenging the mandate and requesting investigation. She knew they would try to block the request, but every day of delay was a day humanity could use to gather allies and build their case. Santos continued her work, digging deeper into communication, searching for more evidence that could expose their crimes. Somewhere in those signals was the key to saving her species, and she was determined to find it. The sun set over Geneva. Secretary General stood alone at a window, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, alien fleets were preparing to march on human territory. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were waiting to learn their fate. He had made his choice. Now he could only hope it was the right one. 90 days remained until the deadline. 90 days proved that humanity deserved its place among the stars. The clock was ticking, and the galaxy was watching. The line came and went without any human ship moving from its position. 90 days had passed, and not a single colony had been abandoned. Secretary General's message of defiance had been broadcast across every channel, reaching every corner of human space and beyond. Humanity would not comply. Concordia Prime, the Galactic Assembly erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted at each other across the Great Chamber, some demanding immediate military action, others calling for patience and negotiation. But above all the noise, one voice commanded attention. Councillor Ed of the Dominion rose from his seat, his ancient body wrapped in ceremonial robes, his eyes burning with cold fury. With the authority of a species that had ruled vast territories for millions of years, he declared that humanity had chosen destruction over wisdom. He announced that the Assembly had authorized military action to enforce the mandate. 500 warships from the and their allies would move into human space immediately, with more forces following it. It sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Species that had remained neutral began choosing sides. Some joined eager to share in the spoils of human territory. Others hesitated, uncomfortable with what felt like bullying rather than justice. A few quietly sent messages of sympathy to Earth, though they dared not offer open support. Jake received news of the invasion fleet while patrolling the space around Set. He was 38 years old, a veteran of border conflicts and rescue missions, but nothing had prepared him for this. His squadron consisted of 12 ships, small frigates designed for speed rather than head combat. Against 500 enemy vessels, they might as well have been throwing rocks at him out. His orders were clear: hold position, do not retreat, by time for reinforcements to arrive. Every hour the enemy spent dealing with his squadron was an hour for Earth's main fleet to reach Set. He led his crew and explained the situation honestly. He told them the odds were bad and the chances of survival were slim. He gave anyone who wanted to leave permission to take his pods to the colony below. Not a single person moved. They had all volunteered for this duty, and they would see it through together. Dr. Lee Park was working through the night in her small office at the Institute. She was 35, an expert in alien languages and cultures who had spent years studying assembly archives. Most people considered her work academic and useless, but tonight she found something that changed everything. In the oldest records of the assembly, buried under layers of outdated filing systems, she discovered documents that had been deliberately hidden. 3,000 years ago, they had conquered 3 independent species and absorbed their territories into their dominion. This was exactly the kind of aggressive expansion that the assembly claimed to prevent. They had committed the same crimes they now accused humanity of risking. Instead of punishment, they had been rewarded. The assembly at the time had been weak and afraid, dominated by power. They had covered up the conquests, erased the records, and allowed them to claim their victims' worlds as rightful territory. The 3 conquered species still existed, but they had no voice, no vote, no power. They lived as subjects rather than members. So immediately contacted Ambassador with her discovery. If they had proved they had violated galactic law and escaped punishment, the entire mandate against humanity would collapse. How could the assembly strip human territory for potential future crimes when they had ignored actual past crime? But understood the value of this information immediately. She began preparing a broadcast that would reach every delegate in the assembly, every newscast in the galaxy, every species that might be willing to listen. The truth about hypocrisy would be impossible to ignore. Time was running out. The fleet had already crossed into human space. He detected the enemy ships on his centers, a wall of metal and firepower advancing steadily towards Sen. He ordered his squadron into defensive formation, knowing they could not win but turned to make the enemy pay for every kilometer they advanced. Rev broadcast an ultimatum from his flagship. He demanded that all human forces withdraw within 48 hours or face annihilation. He spoke as if the outcome was already decided, as if human resistance was a minor inconvenience rather than a serious obstacle. Responded with a message of his own. He declared that his squadron did not recognize illegal mandates passed through corruption and manipulation. He stated that humanity would defend its territory against any aggressor, regardless of odds or consequences. He finished by suggesting that Eth return home before he embarrassed himself further. The message spread across military channels and public broadcasts. Other species heard a small human commander defying the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and some of them began to question whether they were supporting the right side. Of the species was among those who questioned. They were one of the 3 species they had conquered long ago. They had lived under rule for their culture suppressed, their history forgotten, but remembered stories passed down through generations, stories of a time when they were free. Lisa Park's evidence reached the assembly, studied it carefully. The documents confirmed what her ancestors had whispered about for centuries. There were conquerors who had escaped justice through power rather than innocence, and now they were trying to do the same thing to humanity. An emergency session of the assembly. She demanded that the military action be suspended until a full investigation could be conducted. Her voice was small among the great powers, but other species joined her call. The bright council of unnamed stars, all began questioning whether the mandate was legitimate. Dismissed these concerns as irrelevant distraction. His fleet continued advancing towards 7, ignoring calls for restraint. He had waited too long and planned too carefully to stop now. Human resources would belong to they, regardless of what anyone said. First ships crossed the final boundary into the 7 system. Squadron moved to intercept, 12 small vessels facing a tide of destruction. Behind them, the colony prepared for evacuation while hopping rescue would arrive at 9. A deep breath and gave the order to engage. His ship surged forward, weapon charting, crews ready to fight. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would remember that humans did not run away. They stood their ground, even when the ground was made of stars and the enemy was everywhere. The battle for humanity's future had begun. Round 7 turned into fire and chaos as Squadron engaged the enemy fleet. 12 human frigates danced between 500 alien warships, striking fast and retreating before the enemy could respond. They were outnumbered beyond reason, but they fought with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. And from his ship, the Swift Horizon, directing his pilots through impossible maneuvers. He had trained for years in simulators, studying alien tactics and developing counters that nobody believed would ever be needed. Now those hours of preparation saved lives as his squadron exploited gaps in enemy formations that they never expected anyone to find. First hour of battle cost the humans 2 ships but destroyed 17 vessels. The exchange rate was unsustainable for humanity in the long run, but it shocked the enemy commanders. They had expected quick surrender, not savage resistance. They had planned for a parade, not a war. Loreth watched from his flagship, his ancient face twisting with anger. He ordered his fleet across the human pests immediately, to stop playing with them and end the embarrassment. His captain tried to comply, but human ships kept slipping through their formations like water through fingers. Sensors detected new contacts emerging from faster than light travel. Earth's main fleet had arrived. Commanded the carrier relentless from its bridge, 300 human warships following her lead. She was 40 years old, tactical genius who had risen through the ranks on pure ability. Her fleet was still outnumbered, but the odds had shifted from impossible to merely terrible. Cast a message to all human forces. She declared that they would hold the system or die trying. There would be no retreat, no surrender, no negotiation with criminals who had stolen their way to power. Today the galaxy would learn what humanity was made of. Fleets collided in a storm of energy weapons and missile fire. Human ships fought in tight formations, covering each other and concentrating fire on vulnerable targets. Ships relied on superior numbers and firepower, trying to overwhelm defense through sheer mass. Quarter Prime and Matter launched her broadcast. Every screen in the assembly chambers flickered and changed, showing documents that proved crimes from 3,000 years ago. Lee Park's research was laid bare for the entire galaxy to see. The conquests, the cover-ups, the generations of oppression that they had inflicted on weak species while pretending to be guardians of peace. Succumbing to the evidence, calm and clear despite the chaos she knew was happening around 7. She asked the assembly how they could punish humanity for potential crimes while ignoring actual crimes committed by them. She asked whether the mandate was about protecting the galaxy or simply about maintaining power. She asked every delegate to look at the evidence and decide what kind of assembly they wanted to belong to. Of the Rose supports words. She spoke about her ancestors, the free who had been crushed under rule. She showed cultural artifacts that had survived in secret, proof that her species had once been independent before they erased their history. Her voice shook with emotion as she demanded justice not just for humanity, but for every species that had wronged. Assembly erupted in arguments louder than any before. Delegates accused each other of lying, of manipulation, of betrayal. The representatives tried to dismiss the evidence as fabrication, but too many details matched records that independent species had preserved. The truth was impossible to deny. These began withdrawing their ships from the attack fleet. The pullback first, followed by and a dozen others. They did not join the human side, but they refused to continue supporting what now looked like aggression rather than assembly justice. Received reports of deserting allies with growing fury. His carefully built coalition was crumbling around him, but he still commanded enough ships to destroy the humans. He ordered his remaining loyal forces to continue the attack, ignoring the chaos in the assembly. Politics could be sorted out later. Right now, he needed victory. Battle around Sen intensified as both sides committed fully. Human ships took heavy damage but refused to break formation. Ships pushed forward relentlessly, their commanders driven by Eth's rage. Daniel arrived with the horizon's edge, joining the defensive line. His ship was a diplomatic vessel, not designed for combat, but it carried weapons and a crew willing to use them. He positioned himself between the flagship and a damaged human destroyer that was struggling to withdraw. Fire struck the horizon's edge repeatedly, overloading shields and burning through hull plating. Ordered non-sentinel crew to evacuate while he and a skeleton team kept the ship fighting. Lieutenant Maya Santos refused to leave her post, continuing to monitor any communications even as the bridge sparked and smoked around her. Received a message that made her blood run cold. Eth had ordered his ships to ignore military targets and strike directly at the Seven Colony. If he could not have he would make sure humanity could not have it either. Millions of civilian lives meant nothing to him compared to denying his enemies their prize. Broadcast the interception on all channels. Every species in the galaxy heard Eth ordering the murder of civilians. He and his remaining allies hesitated at the revelation. The mandate was supposed to be about resources and power balance, not genocide. Assembly voted to suspend the mandate immediately, demanding that all military acts stop pending full investigation. The vote was overwhelming, with even former supporters turning against them. Eth had gone too far, and the galaxy was finally willing to say so. Eth ignored the Assembly's ruling. He had come too far to stop now. His flagship turned toward Seven, leading a final desperate charge toward the colony. If diplomacy would not give him victory, destruction would. Saw the threat and made her decision instantly. She ordered the Relentless to intercept the enemy flagship, pushing her carrier's engine beyond safety limits. Her ship was the only one fast enough and strong enough to stop it before he reached the colony. Two Vels raced toward each other, one seeking murder and one seeking salvation. Around them, the battle continued, but all eyes turned to watch the final confrontation between a human captain and the architect of humanity's persecution. She might not survive what came next. She recorded a final message for her family and transmitted it to Earth. Then she ordered all non-essential crew to abandon ship. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she wanted as many of her people to live as possible. Relentless and the flagship closed the distance between them. Eth smiled, believing the human captain was committing suicide out of desperation. He did not understand that she was committing something far more important than her own life. She was committing to save millions of innocent people, even if it cost her everything. Relentless and the flagship collided in a storm of metal and fire. Captain had angled her ship perfectly, using her carrier's mass to deflect the enemy vessel away from its course toward the colony. The impact shattered both ships, sending debris spinning into the void while explosions rippled through their broken hulls. Pods launched from the Relentless moments before the final collision, and most of her bridge crew made it out, though many were injured by the violent forces that tore their ship apart. They watched from their tiny vessels as the two great ships broke into pieces, neither one reaching Sen. Rev was not among the survivors. His flagship's escape systems had been damaged in earlier fighting, and he had refused to abandon his post while victory still seemed possible. The ancient leader who had schemed for decades to crush humanity died in the same fire he had tried to bring to innocent civilians. Ing forces saw their leader's flagship destroyed and their attack plan ruined. Some surrendered immediately, dragging their weapons and broadcasting pleas for mercy. Others tried to flee, only to be intercepted by human ships or by the Vels of species who had once been their allies but now turned against them. It led his surviving freaks in pursuit of the retreating enemy, capturing dozens of ships before Admiral Lane ordered him to stand down. The battle was over. There was no need for more death. Concordia Prime, the news of Eth's defeat spread through the assembly chambers like wildfire. Delegates who had supported the mandate now scrambled to distance themselves from the disaster. They claimed they had been deceived, that they never really supported military action, that they had always doubted it. Did not let them escape so easily. She stood before the full assembly and demanded accountability. She presented a resolution that would strip the Dominion of their home seat, impose heavy sanctions on their economy, and require them to grant independence to species they had conquered ago. The vote passed by an overwhelming margin, with even former allies supporting the punch. Hether watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. She had worked her entire career for a moment like this, a moment when humanity proved it belonged among the stars. The cost had been terrible, but the result was undeniable. Humanity had faced the worst the galaxy could throw at them and survived. Over the speech to the assembly that was broadcast across known space, she spoke of humanity's journey from Earth to the stars, from a single planet to colonies across dozens of worlds. She acknowledged that humans were young compared to most species, that they had much to learn and far to grow. But she also declared that youth did not mean weakness, and that humanity would not apologize for defending its homes and its people. Finished by extending an offer of friendship to any species that valued justice over power, cooperation over domination. Humanity did not seek empire or control. They sought only the right to live in peace and pursue their potential among the stars. Any species that shared those values would find humanity to be a loyal ally and a trustworthy friend. Assembly voted to grant humanity full membership, a status they had been for centuries. Seven was recognized as sovereign human territory, and the deposits were acknowledged as rightfully belonging to the species that had discovered them. For the first time, humanity had an equal voice in galactic affairs. Weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. The other species oppressed by the started rebuilding their cultures and reclaiming their histories. The Dominion, stripped of power and prestige, retreated into isolation to deal with internal conflicts. Species that had watched from the sidelines reached out to humanity, curious about the young civilization that had impossible odds. Spent 3 months recovering from injuries sustained in her collision with the flagship. When she finally returned to duty, she found herself promoted to admiral and given command of a new carrier, the Defiant, built with enhanced engines that made it the fastest ship in human space. She accepted the honor quietly, preferring to let her actions speak louder than any ceremony. And to return to Earth as a hero, though he rejected the title. He said he had simply done his job, that any human commander would have made the same choices in his position. He was probably wrong about that, but his humility only made people respect him more. Lisa Park received recognition for her research that had exposed crimes. She used her new influence to establish an institute dedicated to preserving the histories of oppressed species, ensuring that no culture would be erased and forgotten again. Her work gave voice to those who had been silenced for too long. Daniel and Lieutenant Maya Santos continued serving aboard the Horizon's Edge, which was repaired and returned to diplomatic duty. They traveled between human colonies and alien, building relationships that would strengthen humanity's position for generations to come. The ship that had carried news of humanity's darkest hour now carried messages of hope and cooperation. The general stepped down from his position after 10 years of service, satisfied that he had guided humanity through its greatest crisis. His successor inherited a civilization that was stronger, more united, and more respected than anyone had thought possible before the man-made. The first anniversary of the Battle of Sen, a memorial was unveiled on the colony world. It listed the names of every human who had died defending their species' right to exist among the stars. Families gathered to remember their loved ones, mourning their loss but celebrating their courage. Rose spoke at the ceremony. She talked about sacrifice and determination, about standing firm when every instinct screamed to run away. She talked about the ordinary people who had become heroes simply by refusing to accept an unjust fate. Most importantly, she talked about the future. She said that those who died had not given their lives for the past, but for what was yet to come. Every human child who grew up under free skies, every colony that flourished on distant worlds, every discovery that pushed the boundaries of knowledge was their legacy. Stars above Seven shone brightly as the ceremony concluded. Somewhere out there, other species were watching humanity with new respect. The young civilization that had been dismissed and threatened had proven itself worthy of the cosmos. It had the galaxy's orders, and the galaxy was better for it.